can share some words of Dhamma, please.
All right. Thank you, Bhante, and thank you all once again for joining us tonight. So the topic tonight is dispelling delusion. One of my favorite topics, actually. Not necessarily to speak about, but to ponder and to practice with all the time. So the Buddhist teachings are so precious. So the Buddha has been so compassionate in giving us, really explaining to us the workings of the mind and how we create this delusion to begin with and how to dispel it. So delusion is one of the trickiest things because we can't really understand how we're deluded, or like we can't really see the delusion as it's happening. We can have a sort of theoretical sense of it, a sort of idea that we are deluded. Obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be here, and you wouldn't be. We wouldn't be all practicing the Buddhist teachings and trying to do something about it. So we have a sort of sense that we're deluded, but we can only really understand our delusion in hindsight. So whenever we're looking backwards, you can't see it looking forward, but you can see it looking backwards. So as I've been practicing for some time now, looking backwards, I clearly remember the delusion I had in the mind and the delusion I dispelled. And that gives me a sense of how deluded my mind is right now, in the way that I don't know exactly. I don't quite know. I can't really see things as they are, but I know that I'm by following the Buddhist teachings like I have so far, I'm going to dispel more and more delusion. So we have a few days ago, actually, Bhante was so kind to lead us in meditation retreat on the 6 elements, and one of the elements was water, for example. And a lot of people had a lot of trouble working with the element of water, so noticing the water element in the body. But if you actually think about the science of the body, it's composed at least, actually more than half of our body is composed of water. So isn't it bizarre that we have such a hard time perceiving the water element in the body? We can perceive the saliva, we can perceive a little bit of sweat, perhaps, if we really pay close attention. We can perceive a little bit, maybe wetness towards the eye area, but that's just such a small percentage when we think that over half of our body is composed of water. Or we have this sense of solidity of this body, kind of that it's always been there, very reliable. But actually, science tells us that it's constantly changing. Most of the body changes entirely over the course of a couple of years, if not less time. Yet, we have this perception of stability, of consistency, of permanence, when in reality, it's quite the opposite. It's impermanent. So this is no different than a couple of centuries ago, when people had the conviction that the earth was flat, because that was the experience of the world they had. I think we still have that experience that the world is flat, but the fact that the world is round has pervaded so much our culture that we don't doubt it. So it's interesting how there is this disconnection between what is quote unquote reality, what is quote unquote facts, and our perception of these facts, our perception of reality. So how can we actually get, so here we can say here it's sort of reality, and here it's our perception. So how can we get closer and closer? So is it through logic? So is it by just reading over and over again, I am 55%, 60%, I don't know exactly the statistics of my body is water. So if I keep on going, 60% of me is water, 60% of my body is water, 60% of my body is water. Will I then actually dismantle my perception of it being pretty solid and without much water in it? I would say probably not. So the Buddha actually offers us some really interesting ways to, instead of intellectually dispelling delusion, working on seeing things as they truly are. So the reason why we do a practice like mindfulness of the body, for example, which can sound to the average non-practitioner, the average person, like something completely useless or elementary or weird. It's because we want to train our mind to pay attention to what we don't normally pay attention to. And so during the course of a meditation period, there's so many times that their mind goes in a different direction, trying to grasp something that that is a little bit more juicy, a little bit more flavorful, whatever kind of thought or reading or thing that we've heard, or visual images. Instead of just paying attention to something so subtle like the breath, or something so subtle like the feeling your fingertips together, just feeling any bodily sensation. There's so many bodily sensations. We ignore most of it. So we want to actually, first and foremost, start dispelling our delusion by actually looking at what we are ignoring. So there's this beautiful sutta, actually. So all the suttas, not all of them, but most of the suttas are incredibly beautiful. So I'll quote the Buddha in what he suggests on this particular topic. So he says, "But what, friends, is the reason unarisen delusion arises, and a reason delusion increases and expands? Careless attention. For one who attends carelessly, unarisen delusion arises, and arisen delusion increases and expands. This, friends, is the reason unarisen delusion arises, and arisen delusion increases and expands." So careless attention, not paying attention, that is the cause of our previous delusion and the reason why we keep layering up delusion on top of delusion. So first of all, once again, the practice of starting really to train the mind to look at our experience. It's incredible, actually, getting back to the 4 elements meditation or the 6 elements meditation. If you start practicing in that way for long periods of time, or even in a sort of short long period of time. Like I went on a 7-day retreat, which is not really that long, but it's long enough to give you a sort of perception, insight in your experience on how much your perception of the body starts shifting. Because you're pointing your attention over and over to the same subject without any kind of distraction. And so then you start really seeing the water element, not to the potential of an arahat, but closer and closer to the level of an enlightened being. And that's when you start seeing that you're dispelling a little bit of the delusion. And you're also, at the same time, through this practice, realizing how, by not paying attention to what is always our experience, to what is currently present, then instead we start fabricating our own opinions and ideas and creating this kind of really delicious, muddy, sort of kind of slobby experience that we dwell in every day, made of our views, our opinions, our likes, our dislikes, how we think the world should be or shouldn't be, instead of actually being present with how things are. And so the Buddha tells us how we, through this delusion, we start creating these wrong perceptions. For example, that the body is beautiful because we only fixate on the pleasant side of it. We only see one little part of it. Actually, one of the, when I went on that 6-element week-long retreat, one of the things that really made an impact on my mind afterwards was how disgusting actually the body was. But it was kind of full circle. It was what my mind at the time needed to see. I was so enchanted with physicality, with appearance, with how things look like. I used to work in fashion out of all fields. So of course I had very much cultivated that obsession for pretty things. And it was apparent, very big, strong mark in my mind of how something that I always thought was pleasant for the most part was in fact actually quite a burden to be with for 7 days straight. And it's not that my body was doing anything different than it normally does. It's just that I was paying attention to all the sweat and snot and tears and body odors and all the kind of just normal bodily functions that we normally don't pay attention to. And so just as we have this sort of misperception of physical things, then it's obvious that we also have a misperception of our mind, of our thoughts or ideas, which then creates corresponding actions that are unwholesome or sometimes wholesome, but we don't actually quite do it with intention in one way or the other. It's like a hit or miss. Sometimes we get it right and it's wholesome and it brings happiness. So sometimes we think it's wholesome, but it's unwholesome and it brings unhappiness. We're kind of like a little bit confused here and there. And I find the Buddha very helpful, once again, in coming to our help, to actually tell us how do we actually really understand our situation, and how do we how can we get it together fundamentally? And so in Majjhima Nikaya 19, the Buddha says that when he was still an unenlightened bodhisattva, which are always my favorite suttas because the Buddha is so relatable and so like human, going through, not when, you know, he's already free of greed, hatred, and delusion, but while he's like actually still trying to figure it out. And so he's like, okay, it occurred to me at a certain point. I was like, suppose that I divide my thoughts into two classes. So on one side, I'm going to put sensual desire, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of cruelty. And on the other side, thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will, and thoughts of non-cruelty. So then he goes into meditation. So abided thus, that diligent, ardent, and resolute, a thought of sensual desire arose in me. I understood thus. This thought of sensual desire has arisen in me. So he sees it coming, appearing. This leads to my own affliction, to others' affliction, and to the affliction of both. It obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana. When I considered this leads to my own affliction, it subsided in me. When I considered this leads to others' affliction, it subsided in me. When I considered this leads to the affliction of both, it subsided in me. When I considered this obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana, it subsided in me. Whenever a thought of sensual desire arose in me, I abandoned it. I removed it, did away with it. And he does the same with ill will and with thoughts of cruelty. And I find this passage so beautiful because he explains in such detail the sort of contemplation that he does, which comes from direct experience, from really seeing things, not thinking, oh yeah, I'm right to be angry right now, or I kind of like to be a little bit irritable now, but rather contemplating. I'm really speaking to myself right now because I should have done that all day today. Because had I only got to this contemplation, I was only basically doing the first part. This thought of ill will has arisen in me. I guess, actually, well done. You got the first part. I was aware of it arising. So we got that one. Didn't go, this leads to my own affliction, to others' affliction, and to the affliction of both. Or it obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana. When I've actually practiced this way in the past, then obviously the answer, as the Buddha says, it's yes, it leads to my own affliction, and I don't even have to wait. It is happening right now. I spent an entirely afflicted afternoon, for example, and it was afflicting me in every moment I was indulging in this mind state. So yeah, leads to my own affliction, leads to others' affliction. Whenever I was interacting with someone in a way that wasn't terribly skillful, it wasn't pleasant for them, yes, so it leads to others' affliction, and it leads to the affliction of both. Absolutely. So why would I want to do that? See, now that I am actually practicing recollecting this, the honey tip of the aversion like really disappears, starts disintegrating. And in the same sutta, the Buddha is even more compassionate, because then not only does he break down this pattern, and he also tells us, obviously, the flip side of this, so cultivating instead thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will, and thoughts of non-cruelty, that instead get wisdom to arise and lead towards Nibbana. But he also afterwards highlights how what we're currently repeatedly doing affects our experience. So it explains to us why it's so difficult for us also to let go of these patterns. And it's because they're like really strong habits. So he says, bhikkhus, whatever a bhikkhu frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of his mind. If he frequently thinks and ponders upon thoughts of sensual desire, he has abandoned the thought of renunciation to cultivate the thought of sensual desire. And then his mind inclines to thoughts of sensual desire. Same with ill will, same with cruelty. So whatever a bhikkhu frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of his mind. So the other day, there was apparently something shocking that I brought up, which was another sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha says that there's thoughts have a sort of more stronger karmic weight than actions. And it's actually here, it's basically in a nutshell. Why? Because whatever you frequently think and ponder upon, that will be the inclination of your mind. Hence, you will act upon them. So acting upon it is just harvesting something that you have seeded already. So it's our habits, all of these thoughts that we're producing and we're not aware and we're not removing or we're not nourishing if they're wholesome. We just keep on planting and watering. And then they grow and the action is harvesting them. So I find all of this like so helpful to really understand the sort of workings of our mind and the workings, like how we actually create this delusion, but also how we can dispel it, how it's creating suffering, and how we can remove suffering ultimately. And obviously, once we see this, it's also very important to kind of understand how in everyday life we create so many different delusions, thinking that objects or people have inherent qualities, when in reality it's just a projection that we are putting on them or on it based on our great hatred and delusion. So I think it's very important to understand what we're thinking and why we're thinking it to begin with. So I'll end this by actually really looking at what the Buddha says. So in the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha talks about different ways through which we believe things. And normally this sutta is brought up in terms of like reasons why one should not believe in something. But what I'm the reason why I'm bringing it up here is actually looking at it to understand why we have the beliefs that we have. So really looking at, what do we believe by hearsay? What do we believe by tradition? Or by what seems appropriate? Or what do we believe by scriptural authority if we were born religious? Or what we believe by our own thoughts or inference or logic. or personal preference, or what we believe because a teacher who looks competent, perhaps Bante Sudazo, has shared with us. And so we believe it automatically. So really looking at what is our experience and why we think the things we think, why we don't question the things we think, and really understanding our direct experience of the world, our specific experience of the world based on the tools, on the skills that the Buddha has shared with us. So that's all I have to say tonight. I hope my Italian-English was comprehensible in one shape or form.
Okay. Thank you, Ayya, for sharing words of Dhamma. And to all our friends tuning in, now is your opportunity to ask questions. So please go ahead and type questions into the live chat, and I'll read them out for Ayyā Somā to answer. So I see Gabriella is already bursting out of the gates with 3 questions for you. So Gabriella's first question says, I often feel at conflict with my beliefs and values versus actual behaviors. Does this mean that I'm deceiving myself and that I need to try harder to live in line with them or to release the values?
Well, if your beliefs and values are the Buddhist teachings, then yes, put more effort into it. If your beliefs and values are, I don't know, white supremacy, then better do something about it. Toss it. That definitely leads to suffering. So really look at what your beliefs system are. So I don't know what your belief system is, but actually it's bring it back to the Kalama Sutta. So look, draw the connections. Where are these coming from? Where are you getting them from? And honestly, the reason why the Buddhist teachings have become my belief system, and I'm very dedicated to them, obviously, as you can probably tell by my outfit, it's because by doing the work that the Buddha says to do, then I can see it experientially. That something is wholesome leads to happiness, and something is unwholesome and leads to unhappiness. So it's very much on an experiential level. And we don't have to wait for full awakening to experience that. It's available to us in every single moment, which then gives us a perspective of what to expect when we have kind of complete walked the path instead of like backsliding like we normally do, including myself, like I was sharing today. A bit of backsliding today. Yay, 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 yay. But, the backsliding is also useful. It's also part of the path, because if you don't backslide in a way or the other, actually, you can't really understand that the Buddha is right. Because you might think that's actually all you're doing. But fundamentally, actually, backsliding, it's also useful when contemplated upon in that way, in the way that he actually has done when he's sharing as an unenlightened bodhisattva. He has also backslided. He's like, oh yeah, when I indulge in thoughts of cruelty or ill will or sensual desire, yeah, there's a lot of suffering that is arising in me. So it's part of the process, because we are all unenlightened bodhisattvas. We're all on the path towards awakening.
Okay. And Gabriella's next question, how is it that the mind is able to ignore the perishability of everything around it when change is actually visible in any given moment? And her next question is similar, so I'll read them both. How does the mind construct the idea of irreducible existence to begin with, when impersonality is the ultimate truth behind existence?
Yeah, because fundamentally, we're just pretending that things aren't there, because a lot of times we're dealing with inconvenient truths. So, for example, my brother, actually, he is afraid of death. And instead of facing the fact that he's going to die, he doesn't want to talk about it. he pretends it's not there. Like when we're actually having conversations, he just says that sooner or later science is going to catch up and make us immortal. And I'm like, well, and my brother is not, he's like a very smart person. So it's not saying only group of people who are not particularly smart have these wrong views or whatever, distortions or hopes or misguided hopes. It's just we all have them in different shapes and forms and in different areas. But it's not that this is new, for example, that my brother had this behavior. What is new is actually that I started paying attention to that behavior and finding that there was something, quote unquote, wrong with it through my Buddhist practice because of contemplation of death meditation. Prior to that, I was like, okay, yeah, he doesn't want to talk about that. That's fine. What's a big deal? Oh, well, we don't really have to think about death. Like, well, until it happens, like, but there's time. So by ignoring, once again, the Buddha has told us before, careless attention. They're like, yeah, we don't have to think about that. So my brother's like, oh yeah, it's like science is gonna take care of it. Yeah, I don't have to think about it. Yeah, I'm gonna live forever. So it's always the same pattern. It's just the circumstances that change. So we know the theory, but we don't know things as they are. And that comes from not wanting to see. Because we have no problem, for example, understanding the death of death in autumn, like when the seasons are changing. Death and rebirth actually in leaves. So during the fall, they all start dying. We see them and we're like, okay, yeah, all the leaves are dead. Or dying, actually, are in the process of dying. Then in the winter, they're dead. And then in the spring, they start growing again. Rebirth. And then they have their lifespan, and then they die again, and then they're reborn. We see it just as it is. We have no aversion, no particular involvement because we're not a tree. So there is clearly seeing, and it's an experience that is there. But when it comes to humans, we're shocked if the humans are close to us, to our immediate circle. So you see it also in the pandemic, if they're in a faraway country, then, oh, well, oh yeah, of course, yeah, there's a pandemic. Yeah, of course, people die during the pandemic. Like, that's to Europe. Oh, yeah, I've been to Europe. Oh, yeah, I'm really sorry that. Yeah, well, it is a pandemic after all. Yeah, people should work for it. And that's like, oh, it's in my backyard. People are dying. Let's do something about it. Oh, it's my family. Oh, it's me. So you see the sort of levels of degrees of separation, or the degrees of proximity. So the closer we are to something, the more we don't want to see it, but the more it's going to be shocking. And the more distant it is from us, the more we're willing to see it and understand it as it is without sort of emotional suffering.
And Demi said, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Adriana said, 3 empty sadhus. That was very inspiring as always. Thank you. Raj Kambe says, hello and namaste from India. I'm a regular listener of your Dhamma talks. I try to understand as much as I can possible and practice it. I salute your renunciation. I salute your deep knowledge. Oh. Very sweet. Then we have a couple more questions from Gabriella.
Hope you're doing well in India, by the way.
Yes, India is having a lot of problems these days.
Yeah.
So it's really sad. Gabriella is saying, what are some notable ways we can recognize defilements as they come up?
Notable ways?
Like, how can we recognize defilements as they come up?
By looking at them. Simple as that. So look at them. Once again, the Buddha spells it out very clearly. We just read the sutta. So read it again, over and over again. Majjhima Nikaya 19. I think that's why he repeats it 3 times. So eventually we'll get it. And if you can't see it, that's because you're not looking close enough. Carefully enough, actually. That would be the proper word.
Okay, and her next question. She says, as a Buddhist, I fail to live up to my own expectations as I don't know how to experientially recognize delusion in the moment, but only its aftermath. Is holding on to mistakes bad for practice? What are some strategies you have used to check yourself for recognizing and addressing delusion that has been effective?
Yes, understanding that I, and you as well, are not special. So this sort of self-hatred and self-bashing is another way through which we create this sort of special self-identity. So that's why the Buddha calls it a conceit of inferiority. It's a conceit, no different than a conceit of superiority. They're all conceits. So it's when I started my Buddhist practice, I came to it thinking that I was this constellation of really unique, incredible traits, both positive and negative. That I was the only one experiencing my life in the way that I was experiencing it. Perhaps every now and then there was some crossover with some really special best friends that I had, carefully curated over the course of decades. And only them could not fully understand my experience, but a little bit. I started Buddhist practice, and of course I lost entire control on who I was going to relate to, because we have usually nothing in common except the Dharma, like everyone, including the residents here. Probably, if we were not all interested in the Dharma, we wouldn't have ever even spoken with one another. Like we would have just gone talk to my hand, or not even it's completely ignored strangers living in different parts of New York, if we had lived in New York or whatever. But we come together and we start practicing. And you start noticing that each single individual experiences greed, hatred, and delusion, experiences the same, goes through exactly the same neurosis that you do, just a different shade. For example, we all feel so special to have fear of speaking in public, or kind of starting. So when I started speaking in public, I'm still kind of averse to it, but I remember thinking, Bhante Sudazo never ever experienced that anxiety or fear. He was just born with it. There are people who are born with it and people who are not born with it. I am one of them, not born with it. Disaster, tragedy. And actually, I don't remember why I was looking for something on Abhayagiri, because he actually had told me, no, at the very beginning, I had anxiety too. It's normal. I was like, no. Absolutely impossible. And then I was looking for something at the Abhayagiri monastery and found actually Bhante Sudazo's first Dhamma talk to other monastics. It was adorable. It was Samanera Sudaso. And I'm like, oh, this is so cute. He's here, Samanera Sudaso. So I press play and I hear Bhante going, hello, everyone. So I wanted to share tonight this talk. And his voice was trembling. He was clearly agitated. And it actually brought so much, I can't even describe, it was such a warm feeling, because I realized how we're exactly the same person, albeit different. So it's always the same. It's just my perception of Bhante Sudazo is one, and his perception is a different one. So as you go by, the more you practice, that's also why it's very important to be surrounded by other spiritual practitioners, is that normally you'll go through a lot of these kind of trials and tribulations together. And this helps a lot to rub off that idea that we are so unique and so particular. You'll understand, for example, that you'll start realizing that the majority of people have had suicidal instincts, for example. It's not something that's particular to one particular being. Perhaps the extension to which it happens might be a little bit different from one person to the other. But it's the most common recurrent theme. Or depression. Super common. I thought I was so unique. Since beginningless time, I've experienced depression. Everybody else around me is always happy. So this is how we create these stories that do not match reality.
Thank you, Ayya. And thank you for the embarrassing story about my past, which everyone was laughing at.
Now everybody's gonna go to Ayyā Somā's website.
As I recall, it was a good talk. It was a good talk. I was just really nervous.
Yeah.
In the early days, I had to give talks with my eyes closed. Anyway, so Andre asks. He says, "Hello, Ayya and Bhante. I hope you're both doing well. My question is about pain during meditation. After sitting for 45 minutes to an hour, there is intense pain in my legs or feet. I feel that when I look at the spot where the pain is most intense, whether my toes, ankles, or knees, and question whether this pain is myself and ask what the feeling of pain is exactly, it is helpful in understanding the difference between body and feeling and chitta. Is this correct?"
Can you repeat the last part, please? What he does with the mind?
He says, "I ask whether this pain is myself and what the feeling of pain is exactly. It is helpful in understanding the difference between body and feeling and mind, chitta. Is this correct?"
Seems like it to me. I mean, it would be. I would need to have a little bit more details and really understanding exactly how you do that. So if you're actually getting to it in the way of, is this me or is this not me? Or is it more looking at the impermanence, for example, of the pain? So we have this idea fabricated in the mind that pain is this sort of static, permanent sensation whenever we're experiencing it. Both permanent in the sense of that it's never going to go away, even though theoretically we know that eventually it's going to go away, but also as a sensation in and of itself. We think it's solid, no different than, like sort of the ground. But in reality, when you start looking at it, you see the impermanence of it. That was mind-blowing to me, actually, at the very beginning when I started looking at physical pain. Because I actually have more tolerance towards emotional pain than I have towards physical pain. For a lot of people, it's the other way around. So at the very beginning, as soon as just a slight pain would arise in my body, it was like a torment for me. I was tormented. I was like, oh my God, this really stable thing torturing me. I couldn't really, I could keep telling myself, yeah, this is not me, but it totally felt like this was me. But once I started actually noticing that it was always kind of like a tingling sensation where it would appear in different parts of the body, was never in the exact same of the body. Actually, right now it's happening in my foot. So if I have careless attention, there's like a sort of kind of static pain in my foot. But if I look with careful attention, then I start feeling like a sort of waves of physical pain. So I see the impermanence. And once you see the impermanence and how little control you have over it, then you start realizing experientially, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am. And that, I feel like it's actually really understanding. So Bhante Ji says, pain is inevitable, suffering is not. So by pain, he means the sensation of pain is inevitable. That will happen regardless. But the suffering is what we're doing, what we're creating. So once we start seeing the pain, the physical pain, just as it is, so it's without adding things, without hating it, without wanting it to go away, or without actually sometimes wanting it for it to appear. I've heard that they like to do that in Burma. They sit, waiting for, hey, when is this? There was actually a friend of ours, a monastic, that Mahayana monastic, who actually went to Pawak Monastery. And for whatever reason, he wasn't experiencing any physical pain. And you're supposed to look at your pain to really understand the pain. And he was like, oh, this pain is never arriving. When is the pain arriving? Pain, come pain. So like wanting it for it to arise too. So just not being bothered in one way or the other, then the suffering drops.
And Victor says, my observation, romantic love is major delusion. Do you agree with that?
I would say it's partial delusion, as like with everything. You can have a great romantic love with the fridge, to be quite frank. You don't have to have romantic love with another person. You can have romantic love with food. You can have romantic love with pretty much anything. Romantic love for collections of photographs. Romantic love for pretty much really anything. So it's more, what are you doing? Anything can be a great opportunity for practice or a big waste of time. So for lots of people, it's very difficult to develop wholesome mind states like mudita, so rejoicing in other people's fortune, or loving kindness or compassion for the average person. So being in a romantic relationship with someone that you have a strong affinity can be a great opportunity to cultivate that. But it can also be a great opportunity to cultivate all the defilements of jealousy and craving and possessiveness. So an asuttava patujana, an uninstructed worldling, would probably, cultivate both. But since we have the teachings of the Buddha, then we have a great opportunity to make the most out of the situation. This being said, it's not that really, you can cultivate that only in a romantic relationship. That's not what I'm saying. Otherwise, I wouldn't be wearing these robes. But looking at what your circumstances are, seeing also what your inclinations are, and making the most out of it.
And Sally says, thank you, Ayya, for teaching self-love and no different from others. May I ask, does love self without attachment mean wish self happy, wholesome mind, just stay in this kind wish, but not expecting the result that self is better in this way or that way?
Yes, you nailed it. Yes, absolutely. So it was a little bit difficult for me to actually today guide you into meditation because I was getting really into it. So whenever I get into it, then I'm like, oh, wait, I have to guide also people. And while I was practicing, it was so beautiful because my mind was so peaceful. So I remembered the moments where my mind was less peaceful and full of suffering earlier on. And the wish, may I be happy, of course, came naturally. Like, oh yes, may I practice fully this path, may attain awakening. And me and others, not me before Jen and Bante and May and Victor and you and whoever is online, but rather every one of us. Oh, so beautiful. For the mind to attain awakening, for others to attain awakening. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely if we were all enlightened beings interacting with one another? Oh, how beautiful. Of course, yeah, see, just the thought delights my mind. So there's no conceit, there's no competition. It's not like, hey, my jhana is bigger than yours, like my, competition, yeah, my competition is bigger than yours, yeah. So dropping all of that, that's a big waste of time. If you want to compete, really don't get into spiritual practice. There's pretty much everything else in samsara, especially in this country, in the United States of America, in New York City. Want to be competitive? Competition is only, worthwhile if you're really obsessed with sensual pleasure. So if you want lots and lots of sensual pleasure, then yeah, compete with all the other people who are competing in the city. I preview it's a waste of time and you'll still be unhappy, but reflect in that way. We've competed so much in so many different ways and it didn't bring us anywhere. So yeah, the point is not that. The point is freedom from suffering, not creating more suffering through competition.
Okay. And Sally also asks, is expectation equal to attachment?
I would say so. Yeah. So having an aspiration, I would say, is different from an expectation. So I aspire to become awakened, but I don't have the expectation to be awakened. I just do my best in order to create the conditions for awakening to arise.
And last question, Gabriella asks, do you recommend studying the Abhidhamma to better understand various mental states?
I have to see, everybody's laughing here. Well, you have to see for yourself. Honestly, I like what Bhante Sudaso, and Bhante Sudaso's preceptor normally recommends, which is not specifically on this topic, but in general, do what works. So there are some people actually who have a strong affinity towards the Abhidhamma, and it really works for them and helps them. To my mind, it makes me really averse right now. These are my conditions. So as soon as I open the book or hear a Dhamma talk that is based on the Abhidhamma, my mind is full of kilesas. So I don't think it's like a kind of great match. This being said, not because it doesn't work for me, it can't work for others. There are so many other Buddhist traditions, for example, that there are some Buddhist traditions or teachings that are incredibly powerful for my mind, and some others that either make me angry or make me angry. Or I just don't have any affinity for them. I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, it's good, but not my thing. So you really have to see what works for you. If you see that, you're cultivating wholesome mind states and dispelling unwholesome mind states, then by all means, go for it. But if it just, becomes an exercise to learn a few more concepts and, act smart with other people, then I would say it's a waste of time. Close that book and practice instead. That's better investment of your time.
And so this last thing, it's a comment, not a question, but it's really cute. So I want to read it out loud. Sally says, I would like to express my appreciation. Last time when I talked to my mom, I practiced deep listening with her and just feeling her suffering. Then I knew automatically what to say. In the end, she said it's the best conversation we've ever had.
Oh, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, that is lovely. Thank you for sharing that, Sally. It's beautiful.
And it's now 9 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap up for the evening. Thank you all for joining in, and thank you, Ayyā Somā, for sharing words of Dhamma. So tomorrow we'll have our usual 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. So 8 a.m. we'll have Bhante Jayasara again, and we worked out the technical glitches, so everything should go smoothly this time. Then in the evening at 7:30, we'll have monk chat. So monk chat is your opportunity to come and ask any random off-topic wild things you ever wanted to chat with a monk about. So please join in for both of those sessions. So Saturday and Sunday, we'll have the same program both days. So Bhante Jayasara in the morning, and then monk chat with myself, Bhante Sudaso, and Ayyā Somā in the evening. So thank you all for joining in, and we'll see you next time.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.